Hi everybody, welcome to our first Intro to SolidWorks lesson. We are using the LU Apps site and running SolidWorks on a remote server. So if you haven't watched the How to Launch LU Apps video, I would encourage you to go back and do that now. Once you've done that, you can go ahead and launch SolidWorks and it will open up with this first page. This is the landing page, and you'll notice that in the top there are three options here. We can start by creating a part, an assembly, or a drawing. Pretty much for all of our exercises, the first four at least will be working primarily in this part category. An assembly allows you to bring multiple parts together, check fitment. You can actually automate how things work in assemblies. You create mates which lock those parts together. Anytime you're building anything of consequence that would require like manufacturing, typically it's made out of more than one part. So you would do those individually as parts and then bring them into an assembly and see how they work together. The third and final thing you can do in SolidWorks is called a drawing, and this is really just 2D output onto a piece of paper. This is how you would maybe translate your drawings for a machine shop to go ahead and build them or communicate with others. Essentially, this is traditional drawing, drafting, top, front, side, and section views. You would never start with a 2D drawing and then work backwards. It's kind of you start from left and go to right. So you'd start with parts, and from parts you could do a drawing. You could do part, bring multiple parts together in assembly, and then send the assembly to a drawing. But essentially, those are your three options. Again, everything we're doing is going to be starting with a part, so you just simply click on that, and it will launch a new file. So here I am in SolidWorks. I've started this new file. The one thing you'll want to do before you start any drawing is check the units. So if you move your cursor down to the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, that's where we see the units indication. Right now it says IPS, which if you hover over it, SolidWorks will tell you that stands for inch, pound, second. All of the exercises we're doing today are done in millimeters, so we want to switch our units to mmgs, or millimeter, gram, second. So it's really easy to swap back and forth between these. You simply just click on that button and choose the appropriate units that you want to use. One note, you can switch units mid-drawing, but SolidWorks will do the conversion of what you've done. So if you draw something at, say, like an inch long, and then you realize, oh, I wanted that to be 1 millimeter, that's slightly problematic, because if you switch to mmgs, it will convert the 1 inch into millimeters. So you'll end up having something that's 25.4 millimeters long. That's why I find it's always helpful to set your units before you start drawing. Before we get started, let's just take a quick tour of the SolidWorks environment. So across the top, when you're saving files, you can do that through the main SolidWorks menu. There's a lot of other tools and different components here. This is just your standard sort of file menu. Below that is our what's called the tool ribbon in SolidWorks. So that's this section here. And you'll notice just below the tool ribbon, there's a series of tabs. And as I switch between these tabs, those tool ribbons change and the available tools change as we go. For most of the introductory tutorials that we're doing, we'll be working primarily in the Sketch and Features tab. Later on, there's like the Simulation tab that you could use for doing finite element analysis. The Evaluate tab gives you things like the mass of the object you've created, how big something is. You can go in and measure things after the fact. But again, primarily we'll be working in the Features and the Sketch tab. The other thing that you should absolutely pay attention to is this section on the left. This is called your design history, or your history tree. As we add different things within the context of SolidWorks, this will start to be populated with those things. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth as we move forward. Looking across the top header of our workspace, you'll see several small icons. The first two are about zooming. So you can zoom to fit. So you'll see everything that you've drawn on that workspace. You can also zoom to an area where you draw a window. You can go back and look at what you were previously looking at by clicking Previous View. There's a Section View tool here next. You can actually add your own, you can annotate the views, and so that like words or text pop up when you create a view, and you can create your own view specific to a side that you want to look at. The view orientation, this is something we'll actually probably use quite a bit. This allows us to kind of transfer between front, top, side, or an orthographic projection. If you click the little arrow next to this icon, it will open up the view cube with this very handy little navigation window that allows you to kind of look to things. So here in the middle of this, we have our front view, left view, right view, top, bottom, and then the back. Over here, we have a bunch of different isometric views. You can choose through whether you want isometric, dimetric, or trimetric. Typically, isometric is the one we're most familiar at looking at. And that will automatically change your workspace to that particular view. So you can just kind of swap between those. Obviously, nothing's happening on my screen because I don't have anything to look at. Beyond that, these we're not going to get into too much. You can look at things slightly differently by changing your display style. So if I click that little arrow, the default in SolidWorks is the shaded, which with edges on, which allows you to see where the specific edges are. You can turn the edges off just by going to the shaded component. Hidden lines removed just shows you the front faces but not shaded. Hidden lines visible, you'll see those dashed lines of what's happening in the background. And then finally a wireframe view, which doesn't give you dashed lines but shows you the front and back sort of simultaneously. For everything that we're doing, I would recommend sticking with the shaded with edges on. There's a bunch of other selections here about your display styles, what your background looks like. You can apply different colors and materials to things using some of these tools here. But again, we're just going to stick with pretty basic navigation, but I did want you to know that that's there.